everyone. We are now live. This is our first official episode of Content and Commerce. We had a little spring training a couple weeks ago and live streamed our practice session, and this time we're actually here, ready to dive in. So, as you can probably guess from the name, Content and Commerce, it's going to be all about content marketing and how that can help e-commerce companies and what the intersection between the two is. So I'm here with Brent, and we're going to start by talking about the content supply chain. It's been a big buzzword this past year, and maybe we could start by just kind of defining what exactly it means. Tell us about the content supply chain, Brent.
So I think let's just back up a minute just before we dive into that. Let's both introduce ourselves and tell people, because maybe not everybody watched all the gaffes and goofs that we did the last time we did a live stream that actually got published live. So my name is Brent Peterson. I write a weekly article about e-commerce, I am switching from just platforms to how content performs in commerce. Isaac?
Yeah, so I'm Isaac Morey. I'm a longtime writer and editor. I was both a freelancer and then eventually as the co-founder of Content Cucumber. I've helped different companies, probably over 100 different companies now to publish blogs, email newsletters, web copy. And then I've also worked with many writers to kind of help facilitate that whole process. So I would say I'm a little more on the content side. Brent is a little more on the commerce side, but we both definitely have, an interest and experience in both, and we're looking forward to sharing some ideas on this new segment we're doing together. It'll be every 2 weeks, Thursdays, 12 o'clock usually. Technical difficulties this time around, but part of the game sometimes.
Yeah, 12 o'clock Central.
12 o'clock Central.
U.S. Central, not European Central. All right, so yes, I think that you got that pretty well, that I'm commerce, you're content. We're coming together, we're commerce in content. Not that I'm inside you, because that'd be kind of creepy. And also, yeah, I won't even go into jokes, but yeah, that's the idea. So, all right, let's get started. And we will have a really cool logo coming up and a landing page, which none of this is happening yet, but soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I think the good thing with any kind of project is get it started, build momentum, and it's easier to build something on top of what already exists than to try to have everything perfect on the first swing. So with that, why don't we jump into, now for real, our topic of the content supply chain. Tell us what exactly that means, Brent.
Yeah, I think content supply chain, if you look at it in terms of how you have a product supply chain or even a service supply chain, actually, I think content supply chain more aligns with a regular product supply chain like you'd see in e-commerce, where you have some way of creating your product, your content, I should say, going from ideation, creation, all the way through delivery. So delivery would be something where your content ends up on somebody's website or in a print document or wherever that content is. I think an easy way for anybody to look at it would be the same way that you'd see a product getting created to a product getting delivered to a customer. The entire realm of that is the content supply chain.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm running a blog for my e-commerce store. I have these ideas, but I need to turn them into a finished product, ideally with maybe some images, some metadata, meta descriptions, designs, maybe even getting published and pushed out to my customers on social media and my audience. So those are all different components of the content supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, from ideation, where you're trying to think about what things you're going to want to do, and think about it as that like product development or R&D. All of this is part of it, and this also includes A/B testing as you're going through performance, how well it's performing. SEO, AEO now is all involved in this supply chain and how that happens. I think in the past, we've really been focused on the outcome of it. And even in terms of e-commerce, looking at where does that that content fit? And especially in e-commerce, from a content supply chain, we see only customers, or I should say merchants, putting content onto their PDP page, and then that's it. They're relying on that PDP page to answer everybody's question about everything, including your SEO. And some platforms are better than SEO than others, but a guaranteed way of getting traffic to your site is building more content for your site. And I know we are going to talk a little bit about AEO a little bit later, but having that content for people to find it and now for robots to find it is the way that you get people to look at your content. Of course, there's always the paid way as well, but if we're talking about organic and the reason why we want content on our site, that content supply chain is the most important part to your e-commerce store than any other piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I really like the point you bring up about relying on your product description page to answer every potential question that customers have. Like a regular supply chain, a good content supply chain is going to respond to the market and to the needs of what people want. So in the same way that, if there's a spike in demand for, whatever apples, like there's a whole series of things that are going to happen to bring more apples to people. In a similar way, if new questions are being asked, a good content supply chain is going to have an ear to the ground to recognize that and start producing content that answers those questions. And so that just kind of brings into view the way that content is so much more than just sitting down and writing a blog. It's really a whole holistic process, and companies that acknowledge that are going to be a lot more effective at, actually creating content that drives results.
Yeah, and I think one other thing you could look at for content supply chain and with an alignment with the way e-commerce works is the fact that we have so many different channels of where your content can go now. So think about social media as a channel, but just writing your content on other people's websites or other channels like Medium or LinkedIn or all the different places that you have an opportunity to create content. I would say YouTube is one of the best places that you can also just create organic content that would align with trying to drive traffic to a brand, where you have a YouTube video that's describing something about your product that you would like people to look at or service that you'd like people to try, and then making some questions and some content in your YouTube or your video that helps people understand why your thing helps them solve the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one more implication of the phrase, the buzzword content supply chain, is the way that, you're producing kind of an industrial amount of content. And I think that's more important today now than ever with all the different platforms and channels that people use. And one way we can keep that from turning into like this overwhelming challenge or this overwhelming amount of work is through repurposing and having systems to do that. So like with a YouTube video that you make, you've already completed a lot of the research and organization and ideation to also have, say, a blog post or a LinkedIn post or a slideshow on TikTok or whatever, what have you. So in the same way that companies approach supply chains in this like systematic, organized way, it's also great to approach your content creation in a similar way, where you're saying, okay, we've done this topic here for YouTube. Let's make sure we have systems in place so that we're also taking full advantage of the, initial 90% of the work that we've done by just putting on that last 10% to create the blog and create the social post and so on and so forth. So with that, I know we're aiming to keep this first episode snappy, and I thought of a great bridge question between this topic and our next topic, which is going to be about AI. And someone might hear all this talk about the content supply chain and say, I don't need to worry about it. I can just use ChatGPT. The content supply chain is solved. I can just create whatever topic, anything I think of, I'll just create it with ChatGPT. Boom, done in 2 minutes. What do you say to that, Brent?
Yeah, that question great makes a great puente. That was a joke about Spanish and bridges. But anyways, I think that the idea that a person can create everything for everyone is, I mean, look at it as you getting a writer who would just write everything for you autonomously. You would struggle getting that writer to write what you want, and that writer is still going to have the voice of the writer, and that even if that stuff comes back to you for free and magically happens in minutes, you have to then manage all that content. So I think that there's a couple things to look at, and I also will say that as Isaac started out, he's a great editor. If you were to just let ChatGPT do all of your content, eventually it's going to be exactly the same as the next person who's asking ChatGPT to do all of their content. Even if you train that, even as much as you train it, you're always going to have issues where it's going to introduce phrases that are suddenly very GPT-ish. And, I've been collecting phrases that are very GPT-ish, like I just discovered. Like nobody goes to LinkedIn and writes a little post that says, "Hey, I just discovered this." Typically you're doing a little bit of research and I just discovered, or here's something that I would like to say. And there's a lot of extra language that it'll put in, and seasoned readers, people that spend their day like reading documentation, reading posts, or just writing, are going to recognize when something is being written by a robot rather than a human. So I think I'm getting very long-winded, Isaac, but I think what you're saying is we need to have a human involved all the time in that content creation, and that it's also more of a whole chain. It's not just somebody writing a blog post. It's where do the ideas come from, how are we going to get it produced, then where are we going to put it, who's going to put it there, who's responsible for making sure it gets there. And then I think one of the biggest things is how well does it perform. I think a lot of times writers give up on they deliver it and they don't care, right? I think that nowadays a writer has to care how well their content performs, and that they can help clients in that performant part of it. Just like you would use Google Analytics to see how well the thing I'm selling performs, you can now get the same type of analytics on how well your content performs.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a long answer, but a good answer. So, one, the content that you create in ChatGPT is often just not going to be up to the quality and standard of originality that you're looking for. And beyond that, there are so many components to actually building an effective content strategy that even if ChatGPT could write a perfect article about, X topic, you have to pick the topic, you have to, plan how it fits into your broader strategy and to your particular product, then distribute it across all these channels, monitor how it goes, do quality assurance on the article the same way you would with any product. And that can often be quite labor intensive, especially when ChatGPT is the one making the original draft. So I think AI has a lot of practical uses in content and in writing. And, I use it as a research tool or to critique my work or to identify extra avenues that I could expand an existing article with. And those are all, I think, pretty useful in some cases. But the idea of just outsourcing your entire content process to ChatGPT is A, ineffective, and B, done by so many people already that you're just not going to stand out. And one other benefit of creating your own original content that I wanted to touch on here is AI optimization. And it's abbreviated different ways. I've heard AIO, I've heard AEO, and that's what we've used so far, which AEO is answer engine optimization, which I like because it also touches on things like voice search. But anyway, when you create with an AI tool, you're going to be creating something that's already regurgitated from these models and that isn't going to have as much potential to stand out and train the future of these systems that are being created. Whereas if you're making your own original content about your products in your voice with, a full level of input from you and your team, I think you're going to contribute to the next round of models in a way that's more impactful, and where you might be mentioned or sourced or linked out to when people are discovering things with LLMs instead of search. And I guess more of a statement than a question, but what are your thoughts on AI optimization, Brent? What do you think companies should be doing, and what stands out to you as this new field emerges in our industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is how they're going to access your content. And yesterday, I wrote an article about agentic commerce, which is agents going out and buying stuff for you. And I think the most important part of that is where the endpoint is. The API endpoint goes where they're going to access it. So an agent's going to come to your website, most likely through an API endpoint, or otherwise they'd scrape it. The most efficient way in the future is going to be through APIs, where you have open APIs that just give information to bots that would like to buy from you. Um, Having that information up to date and readable, then not by a human but by a bot, is sort of counterintuitive to what we're saying here, right? I think that information has to be styled or provisioned so a robot would read it effectively. And so it doesn't necessarily have to abide by UX standards. It doesn't have to abide by any of the regular standards that we think about. But it does have to have the information that a search bot would think about for getting information about your product or service. And I think, Isaac, you have a much more in-depth knowledge of this process than I do. But I do feel like that things are changing, and things are changing quickly. And we do have to think about writing content for both sides. I don't think e-commerce platforms yet are set up for the agentic side of it, where it's delivering this content via APIs to agents. So you do have to write your content for humans and for agents right now if they're scraping. And then there's going to be, I think, guardrails put on by some of the platforms. I think Shopify has some guardrails around how it wants bots to scrape its own site. I think there's lots of things that are changing right now. Things are going to change quickly, but we're going to get to somewhere soon.
Right, and I think at the moment, one of the smartest things you can do is write for both humans and bots at the same time, which is definitely, I think, a principle of modern SEO too. So back in the day, you could write your keyword, 100 times and put it in white text at the bottom, and you would increase your keyword density. And Google, obviously, or might have even been before Google was the main search engine, but search engines got smart around that and solved the issue. And more over 1,000 iterations, what we've seen is the search engine algorithms getting smarter and better at identifying what's actually quality content. So there's a lot of overlap between what's good for humans and what's good for bots, but there are some things that are especially telling for the bots, like tagging your keywords in with header text, or in the case of AI, using structured data like JSON or microdata to tag, say, this is an FAQ and this is the answer. And in those ways, you can provide content that's both good for end users, the humans that are on the site, but that also helps increase your odds of getting pulled in like a snippet or in an AI summary. Because when they search the web, they have a kind of a tendency to pull from FAQs because it's something that matches the conversational language that the search users, I guess you'd call them, are looking for. So I think it's an interesting overlap, and I think you're 100% right that there's a lot of change occurring, and things are in some ways the same core principles of like answering questions applies, but in other ways, especially if you're a store owner who needs to manage like the technical side of your site, it's definitely a time with a lot of evolution and change, and it's worth paying attention to these things.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we have a few minutes left, Isaac. Let's do our own little mini shameless plug. I have a podcast called Town Commerce. At the end, I do this shameless plug, and I think since this is our actual first live episode, and everything is now being malleable, I'm using that word malleable. I got it right that time. Um, that we should shamelessly plug our case study writing services. So Isaac, go ahead, you start because you're much more articulate than I am.
Well, I don't know about that, but okay, we have a variety of services really that we offer as a content company. Everything from content flywheel, which is a whole set of content including videos and graphics, to classic writing services. But something that we've been putting a lot of extra work and attention into lately is a case study service. And we've been working with various e-commerce companies and the agencies that have helped them to build their websites to just tell the story of how this all came together. And it's great for the e-commerce stores because they get to kind of this report on how the whole transition worked and what impacts it had and what areas for improvement there still are. And it's even better for the agencies because now they have this whole story to tell, in their marketing materials or in their sales work, where they kind of highlight this is what the challenge we faced with this client, this is how we solved it, and this is how we could apply those ideas to you. So this service basically consists of us interviewing both the store owner or the store manager and also, agency creatives, depending on exactly who all was involved. And we gather all that information and turn it into both a short, catchy promotional case study and a longer form, high-end report that you can use not only to market yourself, but to learn more about what went well, where you can improve, and where you stand in the market. That would be the quick version. Brent, I'll let you talk a little bit more about kind of our case studies, and maybe you could elaborate on what makes for a great case study in your opinion.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it there. One thing that Isaac and I bring to the table is that Isaac's a great writer and storyteller, and I'm a great person of collecting data and then trying to get that data into a place where you can actually read it. So I think between the two of us, we have a way of doing a lot of research, doing a lot of interviews and feedback from clients, and then putting it together in a compelling story. And I think the most important part of a case study is that story and that compelling narrative of why a customer would want to, number one, read it, but then how can they relate it to their own experience or their own store or whatever they're doing it for. So I think that putting those two pieces together gives you, as a merchant or a platform or whatever your role is, it gives you a great place to have social proof that what you're doing is valuable for a client, and it's a real life example of a client. I think one thing that we've discovered is that we can put this case study into some buckets. We can actually do some research about your client and your service. We can then do an interview with your team members. So we'd hopefully do interviews with stakeholders of multiple stakeholders of people who worked on that particular project. Then ideally we would interview the actual client that you've delivered the project to. And then finally, we would love to interview the client's client to give them social proof about how well this product or service has done for them. So think about getting a new product delivered to the client. We would like to interview the client in 5 to 10 minutes to see how well that they've done it. And we would ask questions then about how well the experience was with their website, as well as the experience with the product that they're using.
Yeah, awesome. I think that kind of sums it up. And one last thought I had that kind of ties it all together is that collecting user input like this is an amazing way to stand out in search engines and in AI engines, because you're getting truly original, unique insights from people. So, it's not something that you could just regurgitate with an LLM or that all your competitors can regurgitate with an LLM. You're actually telling the real life story of your clients and their success. So I think it's, kind of content at its finest and definitely a valuable thing to invest in.
All right, so that wraps it up for this first episode of Content in Commerce. We will have a domain name at some point. I'm going to promise a whole bunch of stuff that Isaac's going to cringe at, that how are we going to deliver it, but we'll have a domain name, LinkedIn profile, all kinds of fun things. If you need to get in touch with us, I'm Brent W. Peterson on LinkedIn. You can contact us at Content Cucumber, Isaac at contentcucumber.com, or Brent at contentcucumber.com. We are humans that write for humans, but also now I've started writing for robots, right? So tell us a little bit about the closeout on writing for robots.
Right. Well, like I said, FAQs are really, it's one of the main areas we target when clients are specifically looking to rank better in AI, because both Google snippets and LLMs have a tendency to pull from those kinds of data when they're searching live and not something that's already in their database. I guess also worth mentioning though, even the SEO stuff, you're still writing for a robot, and you could still sort of consider like those algorithms to be AI in their own right. So as much as we're coming into a new era with all of these LLMs, there are many ways where the work we're doing is a continuation of what we've always done, which is search engine optimization, writing stuff that is useful to humans, but that also stands out to the robots enough to reach humans in this giant sea of content that is the internet.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Isaac. It's been great. See you in a couple weeks.